The crisp morning air of Port Blossom, Maine, hung heavy with the scent of salt and the promise of a bustling day. The sun, still a pale sliver on the horizon, cast long, skeletal shadows from the fishing boats bobbing gently in the harbor. Among the earliest risers was Silas C. McTavish, a 72-year-old fishmonger whose weathered face and calloused hands spoke of a life spent wrestling with the sea and its bounty. C., a man of routine and quiet dignity, had been running Sis Seafood for over 50 years, a small, unassuming shop nestled between the town's bakery and the local hardware store. Sis' life was simple, bordering on Spartan. He lived in a small, tidy cottage overlooking the harbor, a relic of a bygone era, its paint peeling slightly and its garden a riot of unruly roses and hardy vegetables. His days revolved around the rhythm of the tides, the early morning trips to the docks to haggle with the fishermen, the long hours spent behind the counter, expertly filleting cod and scaling salmon, and the quiet evenings spent reading by the warm glow of a kerosene lamp. His world was small, but it was his, and he wouldn't have traded it for anything. Today, however, the familiar rhythm of Sis' life was about to be disrupted, not by a storm at sea or a lean catch, but by something far more mundane, yet potentially explosive, a scratched car. And not just any car, but a gleaming, obsidian black Bentley Continental GT, a vehicle that screamed wealth and privilege, a stark contrast to the humble backdrop of Port Blossom. The Bentley belonged to Julian Thorne, a man whose name echoed through the town with a mixture of awe and resentment. Julian was a self-made millionaire, a real estate tycoon who had recently descended upon Port Blossom, buying up properties and injecting a dose of modern, often unwelcome, development into the quaint seaside town. He was a man of sharp suits, sharper deals, and a reputation for being ruthless in business and aloof in his personal life. His presence in Port Blossom was a constant reminder of the widening gap between the haves and have-nots, a symbol of the changing times that threatened to erode the town's traditional character. C., for his part, had little opinion of Julian Thorne. He was a man of the old school, his values forged in the crucible of hard work and honest dealings. He judged a person not by their wealth or status, but by their character, their integrity, and their respect for the community. He treated everyone with the same quiet courtesy, from the wealthiest summer resident to the poorest fisherman, and expected the same in return. He was, in essence, a relic of a simpler time, a man out of place in the increasingly complex and materialistic world. The incident occurred in the cramped parking lot behind Sis Seafood. C., as he did every morning, had arrived early to prepare for the day. He parked his battered, decades-old Ford pickup truck, a vehicle as much a part of him as his weathered hands, in his usual spot. As he was unloading a crate of fresh haddock, he misjudged the distance and the corner of the crate scraped against the rear fender of the Bentley, leaving a thin, but noticeable, scratch in the pristine black paint. C froze, his heart sinking. He knew instantly that he was in trouble. He had heard stories about Julian Thorne's temper, his litigious nature. The thought of confronting him, of explaining what had happened, filled C with dread. He knew he couldn't afford to pay for the repairs, not without dipping into his meager savings, the money he had carefully set aside for his retirement, a retirement he wasn't even sure he wanted. He stood there for a moment, staring at the scratch, his mind racing. He considered leaving a note, but he knew that wouldn't be enough. Julian Thorne wouldn't be satisfied with a simple apology. He would want compensation, and C knew he couldn't provide it. With a heavy sigh, C decided to face the music. He knew it was the right thing to do, the only thing he could do. He went inside his shop, his hands trembling slightly, and waited for Julian Thorne to arrive. He didn't have to wait long. Julian Thorne arrived shortly after, his face a mask of barely suppressed anger. He had noticed the scratch on his Bentley and had immediately reviewed the security footage from the nearby bank, which clearly showed Sis' truck making contact with his car. He stormed into Sis Seafood, his presence filling the small shop with an air of tension. "You scratched my car," he said, his voice cold and accusatory. C., his face pale but his gaze steady, nodded. "Yes, I did," he admitted. "I'm sorry. It was an accident." "An accident?" Julian scoffed. "You call that an accident? You damaged my property. You're going to pay for it." "I know," C said quietly. I'm willing to pay for the repairs. But what? Julian interrupted. Don't tell me you can't afford it. That's not my problem. C hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. I don't have much money. He admitted. I'm just a fishmonger. Julian's expression softened slightly, but only for a moment. That's still not my problem. He repeated. You damaged my car. You're responsible. He then proceeded to outline the cost of repairs, mentioning exorbitant figures from luxury car repair shops. C listened, his heart sinking further with each word. He knew he couldn't afford it. He was facing financial ruin. Just as Julian was finishing his tirade, the bell above the door jingled, and a young man entered the shop. He was tall and well-dressed, with a kind face and intelligent eyes. He looked vaguely familiar to C, but he couldn't quite place him. Dad? The young man said, his voice carrying a hint of surprise. What's going on? Julian Thorne turned to face the newcomer, his expression shifting from anger to confusion. Who are you? He asked. The young man smiled. I'm Daniel McTavish, he said, Sis' son. Julian's eyes widened in surprise. He had heard about Sis' son, but he had never met him. He knew that Daniel was a successful lawyer in Boston, a far cry from his humble upbringing in Port Blossom. Daniel turned to his father, his eyes filled with concern. Dad, what happened? He asked. C explained the situation, his voice trembling slightly. Daniel listened patiently, his expression growing more serious with each word. When C finished, Daniel turned to Julian Thorne. Mr. Thorne, he said, his voice calm and measured. I understand that you're upset about the damage to your car, but I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Julian raised an eyebrow. A misunderstanding? He repeated. What misunderstanding? My father is a hard-working and honest man, Daniel said. He would never intentionally damage anyone's property. He's also a man of integrity. He's admitted his mistake and he's willing to make amends. Make amends? Julian scoffed. How? He can't afford to pay for the repairs. I can, Daniel said. Julian stared at him in surprise. You're going to pay for it? He asked. Yes, Daniel said. I am. He then proceeded to negotiate with Julian, his legal skills evident in his calm and persuasive manner. He didn't dispute the cost of the repairs, but he argued for a reasonable payment plan, one that C could afford without sacrificing his livelihood. Julian, taken aback by Daniel's presence and his willingness to pay, agreed to the terms. He realized that he was dealing with a different kind of man, a man who was not intimidated by his wealth or status. After the agreement was reached, Daniel turned to his father, his eyes filled with love and respect. It's okay, Dad, he said. It's taken care of. C looked at his son, his eyes filled with tears. He had always been proud of Daniel, but he had never realized how much he had grown, not just in his career, but also in his character. Julian Thorne, watching the interaction between father and son, felt a pang of something he hadn't felt in a long time: regret. He realized that he had been too quick to judge, too quick to anger. He had seen only the scratch on his car, not the man behind it. He turned to C. Mr. McTavish, he said, his voice softer now. I apologize for my behavior. I was wrong to accuse you without knowing the full story. C nodded, accepting the apology with his usual quiet dignity. Julian then turned to Daniel. Quote, Mr. McTavish, Julian began, a hint of sincerity in his voice. I've misjudged you. I was too quick to react, too focused on the damage to my car. I didn't consider the circumstances, or the kind of man you are. He paused, then extended his hand towards C. I'd like to apologize, not just for my accusations, but for my attitude. I've been so caught up in my own world, my own success, that I've forgotten the importance of community, of respect, of simple human decency. C looked at the outstretched hand, surprised by the unexpected apology. He hesitated for a moment, then took Julian's hand in his own, his calloused fingers contrasting sharply with Julian's smooth, manicured ones. Thank you, Mr. Thorne, C said, his voice quiet but firm. I appreciate your apology. Julian nodded, a genuine smile gracing his lips. Please, call me Julian, he said, and I hope you'll consider this matter closed. The scratch on my car is a minor inconvenience compared to the lesson I've learned today. He turned to Daniel. And thank you, Daniel, he said. You're a credit to your father. You're a fine young man. Daniel smiled. "Thank you, Julian," he said. "I appreciate that." With the matter resolved, Julian Thorne left Sis Seafood. His demeanor noticeably different from when he had arrived. He walked towards his Bentley. But instead of focusing on the scratch, he looked at it with a newfound perspective. It was no longer a symbol of his wealth and status, but a reminder of his own shortcomings, and the importance of humility and understanding. Part 3. A bridge across the divide. The incident at Sis Seafood had a ripple effect throughout Port Blossom. It was a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and the story of the fishmonger and the millionaire spread like wildfire. The townsfolk were initially surprised by Julian Thorne's apology. They had always perceived him as a cold, distant figure, someone who was more interested in his own success than in the well-being of the community. But his actions at Sis Seafood showed a different side of him. A side that was more human, more compassionate. C, on the other hand, became a local hero. He was admired for his honesty, his integrity, and his quiet dignity in the face of adversity. The townsfolk rallied around him, offering their support and their gratitude for his years of service to the community. The incident also had a profound impact on C and Daniel's relationship. It strengthened the bond between father and son, and it gave C a newfound appreciation for his son's success and his willingness to stand up for him. Daniel, for his part, realized that his father was not just a simple fishmonger, but a man of deep values and unwavering principles. He was proud of his father, not just for his resilience in the face of adversity, but for the quiet strength that had shaped his character. As the weeks passed, Julian Thorne became a more familiar figure in Port Blossom. He started frequenting Sis Seafood, not just to buy fish, but to engage in conversations with C and the other locals. He learned about their lives, their struggles, and their dreams. He discovered the rich tapestry of human experience that existed beyond the confines of his own privileged world. He also started investing in the community, not just financially, but also personally. He supported local businesses, he contributed to community projects, and he even organized a charity event to raise money for the local hospital. Slowly but surely, Julian Thorne began to shed his image as an outsider, and he became an integral part of the Port Blossom community. He learned to appreciate the simple things in life, the beauty of the natural surroundings, the warmth of human connection, and the value of genuine friendship. Part 4. The legacy of a scratched car. The scratched Bentley Continental GT, once a symbol of division and discord, became a catalyst for change in Port Blossom. It brought together two men from different worlds. It bridged the gap between wealth and poverty, and it fostered a sense of community that had been missing for too long. C. McTavish continued to run Sis Seafood, his life enriched by the newfound connections he had made. He remained a humble and unassuming man, but his heart was filled with gratitude for the unexpected turn his life had taken. Daniel McTavish continued to practice law in Boston, but he made frequent trips back to Port Blossom to visit his father and to reconnect with his roots. He never forgot the lessons he had learned from his father, the importance of integrity, humility, and the value of family. Julian Thorne, the once aloof millionaire, became a respected and beloved member of the Port Blossom community. He learned to appreciate the simple things in life, and he found true happiness in giving back to the community that had welcomed him with open arms. The story of the scratched car became a local legend, a reminder that even the most unexpected events can have a positive impact, and that even the most different people can find common ground and build lasting friendships. And so, the small seaside town of Port Blossom, Maine, continued to thrive, its character shaped by the ebb and flow of the tides, the hard work of its residents, and the unexpected legacy of a scratched Bentley Continental GT. Part 5. The Gift of Time. Years passed, and the story of the scratched Bentley became a cherished anecdote in Port Blossom, a reminder of the transformative power of kindness and understanding. C, now in his late 70s, still ran his fish shop, though Daniel often came to help out during the busy seasons. His hands were gnarled and his step slower, but his spirit remained as vibrant as ever. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, C sat on his porch, a gentle breeze rustling through the rose bushes in his garden. He held a worn photograph in his hands, a picture of himself and Daniel taken many years ago. when Daniel was just a boy. A wave of nostalgia washed over him as he recalled the countless hours they had spent together. Fishing in the harbor, exploring the tide pools, and simply enjoying each other's company. A soft knock on the door interrupted his reverie. He rose slowly and opened the door to find Julian standing there. A warm smile on his face. "See," Julian greeted, his voice filled with genuine affection. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Julian," C replied, returning the smile. Come in, come in." They settled into the comfortable armchairs on the porch. A comfortable silence enveloping them for a moment. "I was just thinking about Daniel," C said, breaking the silence. "He's coming to visit next week. I can't wait to see him. He's a fine young man." "C," Julian said, nodding in agreement. "You must be very proud of him." "I am," C said, his voice filled with pride. "He's a good son, a good lawyer, and a good man. He reminds me of you in many ways." Julian said, "He has your integrity, your kindness, and your quiet strength." C chuckled softly. "He gets his stubbornness from me too," he said with a twinkle in his eye. They both laughed, the sound echoing through the quiet evening air. "I have something for you, C," Julian said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden box. "What's this?" C asked, his curiosity piqued. "Open it," Julian said, handing him the box. C carefully lifted the lid to reveal a beautiful antique pocket watch. The watch was made of gold and had an inscription on the back. "Read it," Julian said. C turned the watch over and read the inscription aloud. "To C, thank you for teaching me the true meaning of community." Tears welled up in Cis' eyes as he read the inscription. He looked at Julian, his heart overflowing with gratitude. "Julian," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what to say." "Say thank you," Julian said with a smile. "And know that I mean it from the bottom of my heart." C nodded. Unable to speak, he closed the box and held it close to his chest. "This is too much, Julian," he said finally. "You've already done so much for me. For this town. It's not enough," Julian said. "I can never repay you for what you've given me." "And what's that?" C asked. "You've given me a second chance," Julian said. "You've shown me what it means to be a part of a community. To care about others. To live a life of purpose and meaning." He paused, then added, "You've given me the gift of time. C, the gift of being able to make a difference. To leave the world a better place than I found it." C smiled, his heart filled with warmth. "You've done that, Julian," he said. "You've made a difference." They sat in silence for a moment, the bond between them as strong as ever. "I should get going," Julian said, rising to his feet. "I have an early meeting tomorrow." "Thank you again, Julian," C said, extending his hand. "Thank you, C," Julian said, shaking his hand warmly. "For everything." Julian turned to leave, then paused and looked back at C. "You know," he said, "that scratch on my Bentley. It was the best thing that ever happened to me." C chuckled. "It was a pretty expensive scratch," he said. "Worth every penny," Julian replied with a grin. He turned and walked away, leaving C alone on the porch. C looked up at the stars, a sense of peace washing over him. He had lived a long and full life. A life filled with love, loss, joy, and sorrow. But most importantly, it was a life lived with integrity, kindness, and a deep appreciation for the simple things. He thought about Daniel, about Julian, and about all the people who had touched his life. He realized that the greatest gift he had received was the gift of friendship, the gift of community, the gift of belonging. And as he sat there, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the night, he knew that he wouldn't trade his life for anything in the world. He was content, he was grateful, and he was at peace. The end.